It was strange, but somehow the labels on the calves' backs made them look even more pathetic. The auction mart labels stuck roughly with paste on the hairy rumps, stressing the little creatures' roles as helpless merchandise. As I lifted one sodden tail and inserted the thermometer, a thin whitish diarrhea trickled from the rectum and streamed down the thighs and hocks. "It's the old story, I'm afraid, Mr. Clark," I said. The farmer shrugged and dug his thumbs under his braces. In the blue overalls and peaked porter's cap he always wore, he didn't look much like a farmer, and for that matter this place did not greatly resemble a farm. The calves were in a converted railway wagon, and all around lay a weird conglomeration of rusting agricultural implements. Pieces of derelict cars, broken chairs. "Aye, it's a beggar, isn't it? I wish I didn't have to buy calves in markets, but you can't always find 'em on to farms when you want them. This lot looked all right when I got them 2 days since." I'm sure they did. I looked at the 5 calves, arched-backed, trembling, miserable. But they've had a tough time, and it's showing now. Taken from their mothers at a week old, carted for miles in a draughty wagon, standing for most of the day at the mart, then the final journey here on a cold afternoon. They didn't have a chance. "Well, I gave 'em a good bellyful of milk as soon as they came. They looked a bit starved, and I thought it would warm them up." "Yes, you'd think it would, Mr. Clark, but really their stomachs weren't in a fit state to accept rich food like that when they were cold and tired. Next time, if I were you, I'd just give them a drink of warm water with maybe a little glucose and make them comfortable till next day." White scour, they called it. It killed countless thousands of calves every year, and the name always sent a chill through me because the mortality rate was depressingly high. I gave each of them a shot of E. coli anti-serum. Most authorities said it did no good, and I was inclined to agree with them. Then I rummaged in my car boot and produced a packet of our astringent powder of chalk, opium, and catechu. "Here, give them one of these 3 times a day, Mr. Clark," I said. I tried to sound cheerful, but I'm sure my tone lacked conviction. Whiskered veterinarian surgeons in top hats and tailcoats had been prescribing chalk, opium, and catechu 100 years ago, and though it may have been helpful in mild diarrhea, it was almost useless against the lethal bacterial enteritis of white scour. It was a waste of time, just trying to dry up the diarrhea. What was wanted was a drug which would knock out the vicious bugs which caused it, but there wasn't such a thing around. However, there was one thing which we vets of those days used to do, which is sometimes neglected since the arrival of the modern drugs. We attended to the comfort and nursing of the animals. The farmer and I wrapped each calf in a big sack, which went right round its body and was fastened with binder twine round the ribs, in front of the brisket and under the tail. Then I fussed around the shed, plugging up draught holes, putting up a screen of straw bales between the calves and the door. Before I left, I took a last look at them. There was no doubt they were warm and sheltered now. They would need every bit of help with only my astringent powders fighting for them. I didn't see them again until the following afternoon. Mr. Clark was nowhere around, so I went over to the railway wagon and opened the half door. This, to me, is the thing that lies at the very heart of veterinary practice, the wondering and worrying about how your patient is progressing, then the long moment when you open that door and find out. I rested my elbows on the timbers and looked inside. The calves were lying quite motionless on their sides. In fact, I had to look closely to make sure they were not dead. I banged the door behind me with deliberate force, but not a head was raised. Walking through the deep straw and looking down at the outstretched little animals, each in his rough sacking jacket, I swore softly to myself. It looked as though the whole lot was going to perish. Great, great, I thought as I kicked among the straw. Not just 1 or 2, but 100% this time. "Well, you don't look very hopeful, young man." Mr. Clark's head and shoulders loomed over the half door. I dug my hands into my pockets. "No, damn it, I'm not. They've gone down really fast, haven't they?" "Aye, it's o'er with them, all right. I've just been in t' house, ringing Mallock." The knacker man's name was like the pealing of a mournful bell. "But they're not dead yet," I said. No, but it won't be long. Malik allus gives a bob or two more if he can get a beast alive. It makes fresher dog meat, he says. I didn't say anything, and I must have looked despondent because the farmer gave a wry smile and came over to me. It isn't your fault, lad. I know all about this dang white scour. If you get the right bad sort, there's nothing anyone can do. And you can't blame me for trying to get a bit back. I've got to make the best of a bad job. Oh, I know, I said. I'm just disappointed I can't have a go at them with this new medicine. What's that, then? I took the tin from my pocket and read the label. It's called M&B 693, or sulfapyridine, to give it a scientific name. Just came in the post this morning. It's one of a completely new range of drugs. They're called the sulfonamides, and we've never had anything like them before. They're supposed to actually kill certain germs, such as the organisms which cause scour. Mr. Clark took the tin from me and removed the lid. A lot of little blue tablets, eh? Well, I've seen a few wonder cures for this ailment, but none of them much good. This'll be another, I'll bet. Could be, I said, but there's been a lot of discussion about these sulfonamides in our veterinary journals. They're not quack remedies. They're a completely fresh field. I wish I could have tried them on your calves. Well, look at 'em. The farmer gazed gloomily over the 5 still bodies. Their eyes are going back in their heads. Have you ever seen calves like that get better? No, I haven't, but I'd still like to have a go. As I spoke, a tall-sided wagon rumbled into the yard. A sprightly, stocky man descended from the driver's seat and came over to us. By God, Jeff, said Mr. Clark, you haven't been long. Nay, they gave me on the phone at Jenkinson's just down the road. He gave me a smile of peculiar sweetness. I studied Jeff Malik, as I always did, with a kind of wonder. He had spent the greater part of his 40-odd years delving in decomposing carcasses, slashing nonchalantly with his knife at tuberculosis abscesses, wallowing in infected blood and filthy uterine cesses, exudates, yet he remained a model of health and fitness. He had the clear eyes and smooth pink skin of a 20-year-old, and the effect was heightened by the untroubled serenity of his expression. To the best of my knowledge, Jeff never took any hygienic precautions such as washing his hands, and I have seen him enjoying a snack on his premises, seated on a heap of bones and gripping a cheese and onion sandwiches with greasy fingers. He peered over the door at the calves. Yes, a clear case of stagnation of the lungs. There's a lot of it going about now. Mr. Clark looked at me narrowly. Lungs? You never said aught about lungs, young man. Like all farmers, he had complete faith in Jeff's instant diagnosis. I mumbled something. I had found it useless to argue this point. The knacker man's amazing ability to tell at a glance the cause of an animal's illness or death was a frequent source of embarrassment to me. No examination was necessary, he just knew, and of all his weird catalogue of disease, stagnation of the lungs was the favorite. He turned to the farmer. Well, I'd better shift 'em now, Willie. Reckon they won't last much longer. I bent down and lifted the heads of the nearest calf. They were all shorthorns, 3 roans, a red, and this one which was pure white. I passed my fingers over the hard little skull, feeling the tiny horn buds under the rough hair. When I withdrew my hand, the head dropped limply onto the straw, and it seemed to me that there was something of finality and resignation in the movement. My thoughts were interrupted by the roar of Jeff's engine. He was backing his wagon round to the door of the calf house, and as the high unpainted boards darkened the entrance, the atmosphere of gloom deepened. These little animals had suffered 2 traumatic journeys in their short lives. This was to be the last, the most fateful and the most sordid. When the knacker man came in, he stood by the farmer, looking at me as I squatted in the straw among the prostrate creatures. They were both waiting for me to quit the place, leaving my failure behind. You know, Mr. Clark, I said, even if we could save one of them, it would help to reduce your loss. The farmer regarded me expressionlessly. But they're all dying, lad. You said so yourself. Yes, I did, I know. But the circumstances could be a bit different today. Ah, I know what it is, he laughed suddenly. You've got your heart set on having a go with them little tablets, haven't you? I didn't answer, but looked up at him with a mute appeal. He was silent for a few moments, then he put a hand on Malak's shoulder. Jeff, this young fella's is that concerned about my stock, I'll have to humor him. You're not bothered, are you? Nay, Willie, nay, replied Jeff, completely unruffled. I can pick him up tomorrow, just as easy. Right, I said. Let's have a look at the instructions. I fished out the pamphlet with the tin and read rapidly, working out the dose for the weights of the calves. We'll have to give them a loading dose first. I think 12 tablets per calf, then 6 every 8 hours after that. How do you get 'em down their necks? The farmer asked. We'll have to crush them and shake them up in water. Can we go into the kitchen to do that? In the farm kitchen, we borrowed Mrs. Clark's potato masher and pounded the tablets until we had 5 initial doses measured out. Then we returned to the shed and began to administer them to the calves. We had to go carefully as the little creatures were so weak they had difficulty in swallowing, but the farmer held each head while I trickled the medicine into the side of the mouth. Jeff enjoyed every minute of it. He showed no desire to leave, but produced a pipe, richly decorated with nameless tissues, leaned on the top of the half-door, and, puffing happily, watched us with tranquil eyes. He was quite unperturbed by his wasted journey, and when we had finished, he climbed into his wagon and waved to us cordially. I'll be back to pickin' up in the morning, Willie, he cried, quite without malice, I'm sure. There's no cure for stagnation of the lungs. I thought of his words next day as I drove back to the farm. He was just stating the fact. His supply of dog meat was merely being postponed for another 24 hours. But at least, I told myself, I had the satisfaction of having tried, and since I expected nothing, I wasn't going to be disappointed. As I pulled up into the yard, Mr. Clark walked over and spoke through the window. There's no need for you to get out of the car. His face was a grim mask. Oh, I said, the sudden lurch in my stomach belying my calm facade. Like that, is it? Aye. Come and look here. He turned, and I followed him over to the shed. By the time the door creaked open, a slow misery had begun to seep into me. Unwillingly, I gazed into the interior. 4 of the calves were standing in a row, looking up at us with interest. 4 shaggy, rough-jacketed figures, bright-eyed and alert. The 5th was resting on the straw, chewing absently at one of the strings which held his sack. The farmer's weathered face split into a delighted grin. Well, I told you there was no need to get out of the car, didn't I? They didn't need no veterinary. They're back to normal. I didn't say anything. This was something which my mind as yet could not comprehend. As I stared unbelievingly, the 5th calf rose from the straw and stretched luxuriously. He's Raxin, do you see? Cried Mr. Clark. There's not much wrong with them when they do that. We went inside, and I began to examine the little animals. Temperatures were normal. The diarrhea had dried up. It was uncanny. As if in celebration, the white calf, which had been all but dead yesterday, began to caper about the shed, kicking up his legs like a mustang. Look at that little bugger, burst out the farmer. By God, I wish I was as fit myself. I put the thermometer back in its tube and dropped it into my side pocket. Well, Mr. Clark, I said slowly, I've never seen anything like this. I still feel stunned. Beats hen racing, doesn't it? The farmer said, wide-eyed. Then he turned toward the gate as a wagon appeared from the lane. It was the familiar, doom-burdened vehicle of Jeff Malak. The knackerman showed no emotion as he looked into the shed. In fact, it was difficult to imagine anything disturbing those pink cheeks and placid eyes. But I fancied the puffs of blue smoke from his pipe came a little faster as he took in the scene. The pipe itself showed some fresh deposits on its bowl, Some fragments of liver, I fancied, since yesterday. When he had looked his fill, he turned and strolled toward his wagon. On the way he gazed expansively around him, and then at the dark clouds piling in the western sky. "I think it'll turn to rain afore today's out, Willie," he murmured. I didn't know it at the time, but I had witnessed the beginning of the revolution. It was my first glimpse of the tremendous therapeutic breakthrough which was to sweep the old remedies into oblivion. The long rows of ornate glass bottles with their carved stoppers and Latin inscriptions would not stand on the dispensary shelves much longer, and their names, dearly familiar for many generations, sweet spirits of nitre, sal ammoniac, tincture of camphor, would be lost and vanish forever. This was the beginning, and just around the corner a new wonder was waiting, penicillin and the other antibiotics. At last we would have something to work with. At last we could use drugs which we knew were going to do something. All over the country, probably all over the world, at that time, vets were having these first spectacular results, going through the same experience as myself, some with cows, some with dogs and cats, others with valuable racehorses, sheep, pigs, in all kinds of environments. But for me it happened in that old converted railway wagon, among the jumble of rusting junk, on Willie Clark's farm. Of course it didn't last, not the miraculous part of it anyway. What I had seen at Willie Clark's was the impact of something new on an entirely unsophisticated bacterial population, but it didn't go on like that. In time, the organisms developed a certain amount of resistance, and new and stronger sulfonamides and antibiotics had to be provided, and so the battle has continued. We have good results now, but no miracles, and I feel I was lucky to be one of the generations which was in at the beginning when those wonderful things did happen. Those 5 calves never looked behind them, and the memory of them gives me a warm glow even now. Willie, of course, was overjoyed, and even Jeff Marlock gave the occasion his particular accolade. As he drove away, he called back at us. "Them little blue tablets must have good stuff in 'em. They're first things I've ever seen could cure stagnation of the lungs."